Okay, so today the idea is to talk about what the role of the board is with a company, and also sort of the organisational structure, particularly in a startup, and how to progress through that so that you can grow your startup quite quickly. Because one of the big problems is people get very bogged down with bureaucracy, and of course, a startup's supposed to be very agile. What it's all about really is to find customers, deliver something to them, a product or a service, manage the revenue that hopefully you're bringing in, certainly the costs versus the income. Probably, as you're doing that, recruit and manage more people, and then that grows the business so you can go round the circle again, either more quickly, so that you can be generating more money more quickly, or by delivering more services each time and so on. So the whole idea is to keep going around this and grow as you go, and obviously stay in compliance, so be legal, keep track of everything. And usually what that means is you probably have to keep recruiting. Certainly as a startup, as you're growing, you're going to need more and more people to do all of this. So it's very unusual to have a service that doesn't require some level of people. But we often talk about a really scalable business, meaning you can kind of go around this very quickly and you're not limited by the resources of people. So a consulting business is one that's quite limited by people because you tend to need the consultants to do it. And consulting broadly means, for example, accounting, law, legal services. All of those tend to require people. Whereas if you're delivering something where you can sell a service or a software product, actually the number of people plateaus quite quickly. So that's the whole idea with a tech startup, is that if you're selling tech, hopefully you don't need lots and lots of people to do it. You can actually look at the type of business on this startup spectrum. And the reason I put it on a spectrum is that red is the low energy end and purple is the high energy end in physics. And likewise it is, I think, with these types of businesses. So if you want a really low energy business, you really do a lifestyle business, which is where you're paying or generating enough money to pay yourself and maybe your family or a few friends to live a comfortable life. That's what it's all about. So you try and avoid too much stress. So that's down there at the low end. But beyond that, you then can start to look at the complexities of different types of businesses. So I've actually put the professional services quite low down. I think they're quite low energy, quite easy. So obviously accountants and lawyers would disagree, I'm sure, but we put them down there. And that's because it is very much around the knowledge of the people that is instrumental to the business. And that's what they've got to worry about, staying up to date, in making sure that the talent is good, but otherwise it's servicing the customers in a kind of human to human type approach. So actually, as long as you're competent and you stay up to date with what you need to know, that's quite an easy business to run. It's a consulting business. And therefore, actually, shops and e-commerce, I think, are more difficult because as soon as you own a shop, you've got the problem of stock. So you've got to buy in product, you've got to know about how long that's going to last, you've got to deal with warranty, returns and claims. You've got to maintain your stock and sell it on without overstocking or understocking. So that actually provides a lot more complexity than just being a consultant. And then you move up into the middle of the spectrum there to a systems integrator. And although that sounds quite a technical term, a good example of a systems integrator is a plumber. So a plumber has actually quite a complicated business because not only are they behaving like a shop, they're buying in stuff, kitchen or bathroom ware or pipes and so on, but they're then integrating those to produce the end product for the customer, which is the fitted kitchen or the fitted bathroom. And they've got to have the knowledge of how it all fits together, what the latest trends are, making sure that it all works and satisfies the customer as a whole, but they've also got the complexity of having bought all that stuff in, managing the sort of stock that they have, and in fact, they're offering a consulting service. They're consulting how to put this together as part of the offering. So they're all of these things. So actually, there are, of course, other types of systems integrators, so people that put together computer systems. And then we move up to where actually you start to make stuff. So that's the extra complexity now. With apps and software as a service, that's a relatively easy thing to make in that it's software. So it just requires a computer in your brain to put it all down. But of course, you're doing all the things we've talked about, plus you're generating some new IP. So that's added the extra level of complexity, because you have to obviously make sure that the thing you're writing, in this case the software, works, that it doesn't have the bugs and so on. So you're manufacturing, in a sense, something, as well as obviously keeping it up to date, making sure it works with other systems like iPhones or PCs and so forth. So software is the simplest form of manufacturing. And then you move up to a product manufacturer, which is getting to be the most complicated, because what you've got to do here is buy in stock, that's the ingredients or the bill of materials. Then you make a product on a production line. You've got quality control issues. You've still got warranty returns. You've got testing and all the compliance. You've probably got software in amongst the product now as well. Most products come with some kind of software integrated in there. And you've got to worry about your production line and just-in-time manufacturing. So it's even more complexity. And then finally, you get to the most complex and energetic part of the spectrum, which is, if you're a high-tech startup, the product or service you're trying to make is probably an unknown. So you've got all the risk of it simply not working. It's coming out of a lab, or it's coming out of your ideas. You're generating really new IP. You may be conflicting with other people's IP. People might be getting there as well and filing patents, and you don't know about it. So you've got the risk of something completely new. There's a lot of cost with that. You've got to have very high skilled people. You've got to manage all of that. And then you've got all the other things we've talked about. So that's why the startup, I think, or the tech startup, is particularly hard. And as a result of that, if you know that when you step into a tech startup, you're going to have all that additional complexity, you can start to think about who's going to do all of this and what roles people are going to play. So you can start with a classic organisational structure. So most organisations have something like this, where you have a board of directors. If it's a limited company, we talked about that last week. At the top, you've got some kind of PA, sort of office manager that is overseeing a lot of stuff, so PA to the CEO or something, someone senior. And then you've got the classic departments. So obviously a bit like we have here in the university, we've got finance department, HR, operations, marketing, business development, sales, production, and R&D. And although you can mix and match and come up with different names if you want, actually most businesses and organisations, in fact, kind of will fit this scheme. And if you think about this at the start, it's highly unlikely that your business is going to be any different. You can start to see, okay, what are people going to be doing as this business grows in the finance department or the HR department? So you kind of put that in place at the start. There's a few other things I added underneath. So it depends on the type of business as to whether facilities or IT or legal are going to be major parts of the business, and also customer services. But that may be how they get arranged. So it's a classic structure. But what people forget, and we discussed it a little bit last time as well, is that the board is not really in charge. The board of directors is certainly in charge of the day-to-day running, but they are, of course, beholden to and really serving the shareholders of the business, but also the customers or other stakeholders. So a business is not much of a business without satisfied customers. So all of this activity is actually about reporting to your customer, making them happy, and hopefully then coming back and buying more, or telling their friends and then coming along and buying more. So once you kind of understand that, then you can start to think about what people are going to be doing. And the way I've kind of thought about this is that often a lot of stuff that gets done, especially nowadays, is all about getting hold of information and making sure people don't reinvent the wheel that's in the company, i.e. reinvent templates or reinvent documents and so forth, but also sharing information so that the right people can find it and get using it without the wrong people having access to certain information, and also because obviously within a company, especially a high-tech startup, there's a lot of confidential information. Your IP is often confidential, but in any company there will be HR information that's private and confidential and so on. So you have to think a little bit about, okay, what information as I grow this business do I need, and what do I make available to different people? And that's why thinking about these departments is really interesting or useful at the start, because when you start a business, it's only 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 of you, and you're probably doing a bit of everything. So you kind of lapse into the I can see everything that's needed because I'm doing everything and my co-founder's doing everything. But actually what's really useful is to try and organise it into something like this at the start. So what do we mean by that? Well, simplistically, even if it just means on a server or on the cloud or something, setting up a series of directories that are mirroring the envisaged structure of your business. So you've got the board, the finance, HR. And that's where you start putting the relevant documents as you start to create them. And the thing is with a business is you'll really quickly start to create these sort of things. So, almost instantly you'll have a bank account, you'll have bank statements, you'll have agreements with your bank. You'll start employing 1 or 2 people, so you'll have a contract of employment, you'll have people's private details about their bank accounts to pay them, you'll have payroll information. You may get a first customer quite quickly, so you'll instantly have a sales contact in the sales department. And what often happens when you start a business like this is it's a mad rush, a lot of firefighting, a lot of excitement, and all this really important information is just scattered all over people's laptops as they run from one thing to the next. And actually what you need to do is just get that initial team of 4 or 5 people, whoever many it is, to say, okay, when you're creating all these documents and getting all these emails and all of this, start filtering them into the right departments at the start. And the reason that's really important is as soon as someone else joins the team, they may be very specifically sales or HR, they can be given access to those directories and off they go without having to see everything else. Obviously, you've got the board of directors, you've got the PA who is kind of the administrator of all of this, but then you've got finance team, so you have these things called the C-suite members. These are the CXOs, so the Chief Financial Officer, the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Technology Officer. Those are the high-end managers of departments. You see CEO, CTO, well, CEO's in charge of everything. So eventually you're probably going to have a CFO who's in charge of finance and a CMO who's in charge of marketing and so on. But those are big hires. So what tends to happen is maybe the founding team has 1 or 2 that particularly fit. Often a founder will have a CEO and a CTO in a tech startup. And then you're going to start hiring in these as you can afford them and as you're growing and need them. Otherwise, you're going to have this sort of more junior members in there. So things like the accountant, bookkeeper in the finance team, a HR manager or HR administrator in HR. In the operations, depending what you do, you may have quite heavy legal counsel, or you may just hire that in when you need it. I mean, lawyers are obviously expensive, so unless you're very legal focused, you probably don't need to employ somebody who's legal or a lawyer. But you'll have, perhaps an IT manager or something, and so on, and as you go down. Obviously, in a tech startup, the R&D and the production may be top heavy to begin with, certainly R&D. So that's where you may have, a lab full of scientists spending a lot of money and not a lot in the sales team when you first start. So that's a team that grows more quickly. And then as you migrate from R&D and start producing stuff, the sales team come on board and get you first customers, but the production team come on board as well and start to actually manufacture what you're making. You can start to think about who needs access to what. So obviously on an IT system, whether it's something like the Google Cloud or whether it's your own server, you can set permissions. And the point of this matrix is just to say that even if at the start you set up this simple bit of infrastructure in the background, people can slot into it in the future. So a board member or a founder who sits on the board will want to see everything and will probably expect to see everything. So have access to the HR and the sales and the business development. But clearly someone in the sales team is only going to have really access to sales and maybe production and maybe some of the R&D to help them know what's coming. And you can see how you can set up the permissions on that. So basically, when somebody joins, let's say, the marketing team, you simply add them to the marketing team in the infrastructure, and by default, they can't see all the board papers and they can't see all the financial information. And the reason this is really helpful is because when you recruit as a startup, you kind of tend to do it pretty quickly. You've got to grow your team, so you've got somebody coming in. If you've got to get them up to speed, it's far easier just to say, well, look, this is where all the stuff is, get going, than it is to have to sit down and think, well, you need this file and you need that, and I'm going to somehow find all of these contacts that I had that are relevant. So it can save weeks. The new recruits hit the ground running, and the all-important scale-up can happen. Because one of the biggest problems with starting up and growing is kind of keeping pace, not tripping over. Another neat trick as well is setting up generic emails within the company. What also happens that can be difficult to administer is if everybody, as a founder, if everybody's sending you the information, like, when somebody wants to pay you, they're sending you the remittance check, or when they want to bill you, they're sending you the invoice. It's really difficult once that starts to happen to extricate yourself from that. So the way to do it is to set up generic contact emails, so finance at your company, and use that on the invoice. So that obviously to begin with, you will get it as the founder because you're the only one in the company, or the only 2 or 3. But as soon as you've got somebody hired, then it just redirects to them without having to reprint all the invoice templates or whatever it is you use to change the name across. So obviously you can do that with everything. And you just set these up as aliases, basically, so they point to the right people. And again, that helps with scaling. The other reason it's useful is, of course, people leave as well. So what you can do is when somebody leaves, if these are still in use for the generic stuff, they either come back to you again or they go to the person that's succeeding them. And that's one of the problems, is you, as a growing company, you kind of want people to take the initiative and do stuff. And yet at the same time, the founders and that sort of senior management team have the unenviable task of actually herding the cats and not letting it get too out of hand. And with so much going on and with so much new stuff forming, it's really hard. So the fewer chiefs, the better, actually. Partly because you just won't be able to afford them, but also it becomes very apparent when you're in a startup that if you're not careful, you hire people that are quite senior and expensive and actually are used to having their own teams beneath them and don't do anything themselves. The worst thing is having somebody senior come in who sits there being quite expensive, expecting to have a whole team, which is in itself expensive. So although this is laid out like this, what you don't do is hire sort of heads of department in each case as you go. What you're doing is, if you're hiring somebody who's quite a junior, let's say, a bookkeeper for your business, somebody to issue the invoices and sort of log money coming in and all the rest of it, you're putting them into the finance department, but there's not going to be a finance manager or a CFO.
You're going to just slap the title of CFO on them because
yeah.
you're the only one doing the books.
Well, you could, but so that's another good point, which you've got to be careful of as well. It depends on the trajectory of the company, but if you are a kind of startup that has aspirations to become, a sizable company listed on a stock market eventually or whatever, but a proper big business, don't fill in those senior positions too quickly, because what will tend to happen is you'll fill them in with actually less experienced middle managers who you've given that title to almost appease them, but actually they're not of that caliber, and it's very difficult to then undo that. If you bring in a CFO who is a chief finance officer, if you bring them in too early, they're not going to be experienced enough to say raise 100 million on the stock market. You brought them in as a CFO and they may have only had experience of raising angel venture capital, finance or something. So just bear that in mind. It's not the end of the world. And the thing is, you can use it to your advantage. You can get somebody who is relatively experienced for the size of your company, get them badged up as the CFO. They feel great about it. They're motivated, and that can work in your favour.